It is a big week for global diplomacy, with two global summit meetings lined up. The ASEAN Summit in Jakarta and the G-20 in New Delhi over the weekend. There will be leaders of the globe's powerhouse attending these summits. But missing from both these summits is Chinese President Xi Jinping. The question is, what does it say about China's diplomacy in the changing geopolitical world order? Or is China playing a spoiled sport? Well, to answer these questions, we have with us Greg Swenson, international affairs expert and an expert on China. And he's joining us live from London. Thank you so much for joining us in WION, Mr. Swenson.
Good to be here. Thanks, Rachel.
Right. Now, Mr. Swenson, with two big summits taking place this week, the Chinese president is glaringly missing both the ASEAN and the G20 summit. Why is that?
Well, I think he probably feels isolated, and there's good reason for that. I think the world has come to understand that China doesn't really participate in free trade. It's often quite unfair trade. So, there has been some isolation. Yes, part of it comes from, the post-COVID decision by many in the West, especially the U.S., to correct the supply chain dependency that they had on China. I'm not sure there's much that Xi could do about that. But much of this isolation is due to his own behavior and China's own behavior as well. And these are self-inflicted wounds for the most part.
Absolutely, Greg. Now, skipping the summit also reflects China's unease with the G20 as a platform and a stark contrast to its investing in other fora such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Sure. Yeah, look, I think there's going to be diversification globally, away from the top economies, notably China and the U.S., and more trade and investment with the new BRICS, we'll call them. There are a lot of emerging economies, and I think again that points to the U.S. deciding not to be so dependent on the Chinese supply chain, and also challenges with the Chinese economy. Again, most of which are self-inflicted wounds. There's the unfair trade. There's the aggressive foreign policy and behavior, with Hong Kong and threats to Taiwan. But there's also the lockdowns, which were devastating for China. And it showed that this totalitarian behavior by the Chinese government, by the CCP, makes the risks of investment and trade dependency even greater. And then, of course, you have the demographics. The one-child policy continues to decimate the Chinese economy. From 2019 to 2022, the workforce declined in China from 774 million to 733 million. It's a significant drop. That's the size of the German workforce, just to put some context on it. So, they have some real challenges internally, most of which are self-inflicted wounds. And I think the confrontation with the U.S. was bound to happen, they don't participate in fair trade. So the isolation is really the CCP's fault, not the West's.
I was just coming to that, Greg. Do you think this year's no-show at G20 dampens Beijing's hopes of a renewed engagement with the Western powers?
I think it does. You would think he would take the opportunity to reconcile with the West and try to fix some of these problems. But for now, again, they're not engaged in free trade, so they're surely not entitled to preferential market access to the U.S. or anywhere in the West, for that matter. I think what might help them, and perhaps he understands this and chose not to go to the G20 for this reason, the U.S. and European electric vehicle mandates are decimating the auto industries in both the U.S. and Germany. And you add that to the COVID lockdowns, and you have a chance here for Chinese EVs to really overwhelm the market. So there's some upside for the Chinese economy with some of these new emerging industries like electric vehicles. That's the fault of the West, and that's a self-inflicted wound on Europe and the U.S. because of these EV mandates. But other than that, there's not a lot of potential upside that I can see in the Chinese economy.
Right. We are right now obviously decoding the reasons why the Chinese president is giving a miss to both the G20 and the ASEAN summit. Do you think that she is missing the G20 summit because it is miffed with the Indian Prime Minister's response that normal ties can only be resumed between China and India after the border tensions are eased?
Absolutely. Again, this points to Chinese not only foreign policy, but their foreign behavior and what they're doing in India and Hong Kong and Taiwan, what they're doing to the Uyghurs. There's a long list of isolationist policy that really should be on the back of Xi and the CCP, not any other foreign entities.
Right, and also a few weeks ago, Greg, we saw the world leaders converge in Johannesburg for the BRICS summit, and this was Xi's second international trip. Why is the Chinese leader finding it difficult to keep the ignition when it comes to international diplomacy?
It's a great question, and there's really no great answer. But I think it points to the totalitarian nature of the CCP. The only real foreign countries that they have anything in common with would be, perhaps Russia, North Korea, and maybe some of the smaller communist regimes like Cuba. But that's not really a good sign for participating in the global economy. I think it's a huge mistake. Yes, he's reached out to some of the other emerging economies and perhaps can trade and encourage investment. But this Belt and Road policy is failing. He's getting pushback from the West, and I do think that trying to depend on the smaller emerging economies, while wise in the long term, and maybe he sees that these economies will play a bigger role in the future. It's not right now, and I think his dependency on trade with countries like Germany and the U.S. really make him dependent on trade. He's got to create jobs. He's not doing that. As I mentioned, workforce is down significantly, and he's got some real challenges internally.
Right, Mr. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. We'll, of course, have to wait and see how both the summits pan out in Xi Jinping's absence. But thanks very much for joining us and WION and sharing your insights with us on this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.